Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're enjoying the conference as much as I am, and I want to take a minute and just thank Anthony and the team at SkyBridge and SALT for putting this on and inviting this distinguished panel. Why don't we do just very brief introductions, and then we'll jump right in.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Very excited to be here. My name is Hassan Ahmed. I'm the Regional Director for Southeast Asia for Coinbase. I look after our business and commercial operations for the region. I have about 20 years of operating experience across TradFi, FinTech, and crypto, and very excited to be here.
Hi, I'm John from Matrixport. I'm the CEO of Matrixport. Matrixport provides crypto financial service and also prime brokerage and custody. Founded 3 years ago. Very nice to meet you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So Ali Madhavji, Managing Partner at Blockchain Founders Fund. We've got over 100 portfolio companies in this space. We're a Singapore regulated fund and very early stage. So we're typically coming into companies at a pre-seed or early seed stage typically. But thrilled to be here.
Hello, I'm the CEO of Vulcan Forged. You may know us by our token PYR. We were traditionally a game studio first and moved into the world of blockchain and NFT gaming a couple of years ago. Grew to about 200,000 users, and we're on our journey to see how the whole blockchain and metaverse space pans out.
Well, that's an interesting segue. So obviously, when you do prep for something like this, there are certain catalyst events, and the last 6 months has been daunting, to say the least. I think the last 6 days might be called like a nuclear event, and so you've heard a lot of prominent voices say that this is going to be the death of crypto, that we really have a very tough road going forward. Why are they wrong?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. I mean, I think what's really interesting, right? So when you look at this space and you look at what it stands for, right? You think about, what is blockchain technology at its core, and it's the best technology out there for solving multi-party trust issues. Then you look at some of the other things like the innovation of NFTs, and it's, people think it's JPEGs, but in reality, it's the first way in human history to track ownership in a digital world. And we're all spending more and more time in the digital world, right? And so you've got this incredible innovation, right? And it's founded on a lot of premises, of course, around like transparency, decentralization, and some of those aspects work hand in hand with, strong centralized institutions. But when you look at a lot of the failures that have been happening, not only over the last 6 days, but going back to, say, Three Arrows Capital, or now looking at like BlockFi, Voyager, Celsius, of course, FTX, it's all centralized institutions that weren't doing these things that we built this industry around on, like, for example, transparency. And so, I don't think it's the end of crypto. I mean, it definitely isn't. I mean, it's very clear that you've got, in reality, still fairly resilient markets. But I think regardless of that, the technology is so much more. And so I think this is just, going to help weed out, I think, a lot of bad actors, which is in reality what was happening here. There's going to be collateral damage, but at the end of the day, this industry is going to get put back together better, faster, stronger.
Yeah, just to add to what Ali's saying there, I totally agree. I think 2018 we saw the cleanse of all these crazy ICOs all over the place, and I think now we're going to see a bit of a cleanse of just this focus, this incessant focus on price and trading and crypto, where we've somehow avoided the benefits of, not avoided, but neglected, I'd say, the benefits of blockchain technology and its transparency. And I do hope, perhaps, that we have a phrase in Vulcan Forge, like utility, not hype, that perhaps we might start actually building into the utility of what blockchain can bring to, well, in our case, the gaming industry. I mean, as Ali said, the NFT ownership, transparency, economies in the virtual world, these are all things which are fascinating to us, and I think which is something the metaverse touches on a little bit, and hopefully a lot of it in times to come. And so, yeah, I think this cleanse is probably much needed for the space, and I think a refocus on why we're involved in blockchain in the first place, as opposed to just sort of random tokens popping out of nowhere, is something that benefits us, especially in the gaming world.
Yeah, I think this isn't the first time the death of crypto has been proclaimed, right? And so I think for many of us who've been around and have experienced some of these cycles, in some ways it feels familiar, in some ways it feels different. But every time there's this interplay between the financial cycle and the technology cycle, and they sort of, sometimes the financial cycle gets ahead of itself. And even though what we're calling this as a bear market, it's actually a bull market on the technology and the building side of things. Because if you track some of the activity around like monthly active developers and just the number of kind of new both kind of infrastructure layer projects as well as application layer projects that are coming, this is sort of what's setting the stage and like planting the seeds for the next cycle that's going to get set up.
I think that's actually a great point. I'm fortunate to consult to some Web2 companies that are looking for integration in Web3. They, over the last several months, have actually pushed more chips into the space. They're looking to build even more aggressively, and quite frankly, what they were looking at doing was, less expensive now because the development costs have actually come down for them. So.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like what we are seeing in terms of both just kind of first principle or like core R&D as well as like adoption of kind of bigger companies that have distribution already that are like now validating the space and sort of moving in. It's happening on both directions. So pretty much kind of any industry, any big name, like they're thinking about it, like the Nike sort of swoosh metaverse announcement, for example, right? So everyone's trying to think of, hey, how do I use this to enrich sort of the experience for my users and make it 10x better? And we're still sort of just starting to kind of chip away at the edges of it. But for those of us, again, who've been around, like we know that that emergent behavior will lead us to something much more.
Yeah, to answer your first question, I think obviously it's not the end of crypto. FTX kind of represent crypto. The Bitcoin works very well, Ethereum works very well, DeFi protocols works very well, especially the DeFi. I think DeFi works above my expectation. They really protect clients' funds and didn't shut down. And why people lose money in FTX because Sam is a liar, and people trust Sam's public icon, and people don't ask where are my money, where are my coins. So this will be key. So after FTX, I think people will care their own money much more, will care the technology much more, and it will also push Web3 users using more decentralized infrastructure rather than trust someone. And obviously, regulator will also take action to FTX and this field. I believe after this, this industry will be much mature.
So Ali, you brought up the metaverse, and I really am fascinated with where we go. Jamie, you and I were talking backstage about your efforts for Vulcan in metaverse builds and where we go from here. A recent report by Gartner actually suggested that 25% of people globally will be spending at least 1 hour a day in the metaverse by 2026. Which seems insane, but I believe that we will go there. I don't know that it will be the imagination of the metaverse that we currently see or what that immersive environment will look like, but I do believe we're going there. With that being said, if that is a true statement or even remotely accurate, that represents a massive opportunity for not only mind share, attention, but commerce and disrupting the way we do transactional business as we know it. From each of your perspectives, where are you focusing to stay ahead of that curve? And for anyone that you give counsel, where should they be paying attention to or looking to make investments in right now?
Well, I'll start on this one because a lot of the talks I do is metaverse related. I don't want to sort of drone on and on about what I think the metaverse is. I'll just sort of try and bullet point what I do, because I think, let's be honest, we're in an infancy stage of not even the metaverse, but in defining the metaverse. I mean, on one side, you've got the Zuckerberg and the Apple metaverse of VR headsets and Oculus and sort of holograms, all that sort of hardware tech. On the other side, you've got the sort of blockchain games and sort of economies within virtual worlds saying they're the metaverse. And then, so I think we're still kind of sort of defining what it is. I mean, you could really trace it back to sort of Second Life or any sort of world where you detach yourself from reality and go into a world where you're doing something else, perhaps with an economy. So I think even Second Life had Bitcoin involved. You could say that's a metaverse. So the metaverse has always been around to an extent, but it's just now we're just seeing it thrown in our faces. In terms of the blockchain element of it, of course, we're a blockchain gaming company. I think it's taken us a while to kind of realize that there are three different types of sort of blockchain game. You've got gaming with NFTs, you've got play to earn, and then you've got the metaverse, which I would define now as an economy within a virtual world. Play to earn has had its moments, and we've realized that, you know, if you're going to go down the play to earn route, then just be honest and say, okay, this is what we're doing. We're trying to make a sustainable model to help those through a sort of visual representation in the game, because a lot of the games aren't exactly great because they're making money. But yeah, to go back to your question, is the metaverse going to be the future? You know, even as a metaverse company, I'm not going to be arrogant enough to say, yes, 100% it is, because we don't know. What we do know is the technology's been around for a while. I think economy is always going to be around for forever. Human interaction within socializing is, so if you can combine those two. So yeah, I think economies within virtual world is where I would place the definition of metaverse to that extent.
Yeah, I'll jump in, right? So, you know, I think there's a couple of challenges that we're seeing, right? So right now, to give you an idea, we look at 400 to 600 new companies a month that you know, are across sort of the entire spectrum. But a lot of those are in the gaming space, and a lot of them are metaverse. And so when we look at the roadmaps of these companies, we're expecting something like another 1,000+ metaverses to come online in the next 6 months. And that might be an understatement. I mean, now I expect some of these companies to probably miss their timelines and, you know, probably maybe even never make it. But you're going to have a lot of saturation. So one, we actually think in some ways, even though you don't see a ton of live metaverses yet, we do think in some ways it's going to be oversaturated very quickly, right? I think the second part to that is then which metaverses can win, right? Because going as a general metaverse trying to compete with Meta or other players, that's not an easy feat. And so we're looking at, for example, like hyper niche metaverses where someone can win like a very niche market and then use that as a sort of like springboard to sort of grow from there out, right? So that's another thing that we're looking at. In terms of like if the future is metaverses, it is, but it depends how you define it, right? So the way that we're thinking about it is, in reality, it's just everything we do in the digital world. And like we're already spending so much time on our phones and computers, and if you sort of use that as an extension of that digital realm, like in reality, we already spend a ton of time, and it's going to continue to interact more with AR, VR, and other technologies, whether it's gaming or not, right? It could literally be corporate training, right? And so there's all sorts of different ways that this is going to move, I think very broad. But the idea is like, where can it enhance people's experience to do things more collaboratively? Like even, you know, think about remote working and trying to create a more interesting environment where people can work together effectively. And can you make it synonymous with working in an office? I don't think we're there yet, but in the longer run, we'll get there, right? So there's a lot of different interesting aspects, I think, to the metaverse over time that'll start to emerge.
Well, what I hear you describing, honestly, could become the next iteration of a website. It's just an immersive experience that enriches the overall customer interaction. So I agree.
Yeah, I think just to add here is, you know, there's sort of the open metaverse concept that will have AR, VR, and other elements. But I think that the kind of blockchain layer to the extent of like where it's interesting and useful for this concept is, I think, is one is just, you know, it enables kind of these digital property rights, and it makes sort of your assets, you know, your ability to custody your assets and be able to take them with you. But I think the other kind of underappreciated aspect of like why this is sort of interesting is the open composability aspect of it too. So even though we might end up having many sort of metaverses, I think what will be different if people are choosing to build on Web3 is the kind of mashups that you can do, and also being able to embed like experiences and like the kind of value transfer layer together in a more seamless way. I think that's sort of where, you know, you could see something new come out of something like this that, you know, necessarily wouldn't exist otherwise.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, myself and Matrixport is quite focused on crypto, so I'm not very following metaverse closely. I would like to give my time to others, yeah, but more from others, yeah.
Well, but again, crypto is going to be the fundamental asset that powers these transactions, and so they run part and parcel. And you all referenced mainly consumer-facing applications. I think it's really interesting. Forbes just released some of its forecasts for the APAC region, and they actually alluded to the opportunity in industrial metaverses, saying that they actually see that investment doubling over the next year, and they highlighted BMW's new digital design studio in China, and then also a collaboration between Unity Technology and Hyundai. So where do you see the industrial side, that other side of blockchain, smart contracting, crypto adoption that is not the sexy, 1000x run of a token, but it's going to really power where we go from here?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking heavily at, B2B metaverses, right? And I think this is essentially where major brands can actually create a place where their users can interact with them and across, whether it's e-commerce or other aspects in that world. I think there's still a lot to flush out here, but we're already seeing quite a lot of interesting pilots where major brands, right, some of the most well-known brands in the world are actually piloting different aspects with startups that we're looking at, right? So I do think it's very early, and I don't think those taps have really been turned on where, their user bases are flooding to any of these products yet. We're just not there yet. But I do think that you're going to start seeing more of this, in the very near future.
Yeah, I think B2B is obviously not something that we do personally, but I think it's not hard to sort of see how this technology can be used with B2B. I mean, especially if we're talking about sort of VR and AR and sort of all this educational technology and blockchain transactions and such. But I think we have to sort of look how blockchain could be used in our industry in gaming. Look what worked before. Gaming's worked before, economies have worked before, socializing has worked before. Now, how can blockchain technology sort of combine and marry the three of those? And, well, it's quite simple. I mean, you have the transparency, you have ownership, and all the sort of the economies we are all familiar with. Whether or not sort of the Web 2 community or the community not, learned with blockchain technology are going to move over, it's hard to say. It's hard to say if gamers will ever want to sort of leave the pay-to-earn model. I mean, still the pay-to-earn model with no blockchain or NFTs is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and the blockchain gaming industry is only maybe 100 to 200 million or something silly. So people are still willing to pay for centralized games. People are still willing to not have NFTs. People are still willing to sort of abandon the whole play-to-earn model. And there are reasons why I think that is the case, especially with play-to-earn, which is once you put your mind on that money-making set, you don't want to play the game anymore. It's not a game anymore. It's about making money. So it's sort of straddling that fine line between working out how can you integrate blockchain technology to allow the consumers to either enjoy themselves more or benefit more. And benefit more is the easy one, of course, where you have economies within the games, but enjoy it more, it is a tricky one. I mean, it's a tricky one to sort of circle that square in the gaming market. But yeah, ownership and transparency is certainly the two biggest benefits that we see within virtual worlds and blockchain.
So we're sitting in Asia, right? So I think one of the things that's really kind of important to highlight about it, especially kind of Web3 gaming as like one of sort of the verticals that we're talking about is, like Southeast Asia has become like this sort of really hotbed of kind of Web3 gaming. And some of the kind of setup or dynamics that are going on here is that in some way sort of Vietnam has become the producer, Philippines has become the consumer, and Singapore has become the capital provider. And there's a lot of holdcos, for these startups that are also kind of housed out of Singapore. So it's very interesting to kind of see how this ecosystem has kind of sprung from the ground up. And really, like, there had been like, pockets of kind of gaming innovation here and there. But this is sort of really one where like the narrative and just the level of excitement that you see and the groundswell of people really wanting to be a part of this movement, it's visceral. Like I don't know if you've been to the Philippines already or you're going after this, but if you go there, like just do get to talk to the folks, like the gamers on the ground, and they are all in on this. And it's just a starting point, right? So once people kind of do their onboarding via games, so they like set up their self-hosted wallets, they interact with NFTs, the next step is then, okay, how do I explore the rest of Web3 and where do I go from here? And you were seeing this even with like the guilds that had initially formed like around like play to earn, but they have also kind of moved on from like that model, right? Because the kind of the spaces is moving fast, and so it's all these kind of very interesting dynamics of you're aggregating kind of consumers, you're sort of upskilling them in some ways, even could be on a gaming ladder or it could be on a Web3 kind of engineering proficiency ladder. And it's starting to have these unintended kind of, interesting positive benefits. And a lot of it is because blockchains and like these kinds of Web3 sort of are like, they're fundamentally permissionless. So the kind of access that you can get, whether it's for metaverses or like, something like USDC, stablecoins, like DeFi, whatnot, you can be sitting anywhere with a connection and you can go and sort of get access to these things. So even when we talk about like financial inclusion and kind of all these other things, there's a reason why like this kind of movement is existing in this part of the world.
No, I mean, as evidenced by Axie Infinity, it was such a rapid deployment, and the proliferation of it was just mind-blowing. The numbers that they were doing and the time spent in game, I mean, that is what every brand under the under the sun thirsts for, is that sort of raving fan culture. And I agree. I think it can be duplicated, and we are just in the nascent, very early stages of where we can go from here. John, I want to tilt the conversation towards the elephant in the room, the regulatory framework. Obviously, I mean, it's a hot button issue in the United States. Singapore has given some guidance recently as well. We deal with this decentralized product that is crypto and blockchain, but we have these things called borders. And so what do you see as a catalyst for getting meaningful collaboration, either in regions or certainly, I mean, worldwide seems laughable, but where do we go forward from here to give better framework for major corporations, Fortune 500, even central banks and countries themselves, treasuries, to look at this technology in a more meaningful way?
Yeah, so from the regulatory angle, I think right now is FTX really push regulator serious consider regulate the crypto space, especially for retail consumers. Yeah, I think after FTX, most institutions face to retail kinds will required to be licensed. But the key is we can expect that regulator can guarantee such kind of things can't happen. I personally believe in technology rather than the regulatory. So after the FTX, we saw a lot of exchanges. They cooperate with Nansen, the on-chain data analytics, to prove they really have they really have their coins in the address. I think this is a quite good beginning. We should use technology to solve this problem. We can't rely on regulatory, but I think regulatory is super necessary, especially to protect retail clients, because you can't expect retailers understand the technology very well and check all the data themselves. But for this industry, we have to think about how, for example, Matrixport is also a centralized institution. How I can prove we don't lie to you, right? How we can prove that we are good people, we don't do any bad things. So we can't ask a regulator to prove for us. We have to use the technology to prove ourselves. So yeah, so I would say after this, regulatory will be quite heavy to all institutions in this space, but we can solve this problem.
So I have a lot of views on this topic.
I'm sure you have thoughts.
So at Coinbase, we pride ourselves on being the most trusted and the easiest to use crypto exchange around the world, and that's come from a culture of being very playing by the rules, like following all applicable laws and regulations. But at the same time, I think we have to also just sort of appreciate like the regulators' challenge, around this technology as well, because it's very multifaceted. It's about like touching different parts of the elephant and characterizing it differently. That's part of the challenge. And there's also just regulatory topics, right? There's so many of them: AML, consumer protection, investor protection, tax compliance, securities, and so on. And so it is hard to kind of come up with like the right regulatory framework that can like capture all of these policy goals. But my point of view on this, especially sort of for many of these APAC countries, is you have to sort of look at the whole thing in totality. And there is a big opportunity for many of these countries to become still like these Web3 hubs and capture a lot of kind of FDI and inflows on the kind of builder side as well. But the only way you get there is if you empower the user access and user retail access side, as well as like providing kind of policy and some kind of business friendliness for startups to be able to kind of get seeded within your ecosystem. And once you have both retail, liquidity, and like builders, you can get a flywheel going. So with the Philippines, for example, internally, like within Coinbase, I champion that the Philippines is the most interesting crypto market in the world. They put up their regulatory framework in 2017, 2018, and today they have 3 use cases at scale. They have trading, they have blockchain-based remittances, and now they have Web3 gaming. And we're starting to see a lot of builder activity coming online in the Philippines. So during the kind of 𝐻𝐢𝐬𝐭𝐞𝐧 days, for example, there was more FDI coming in via SLP, the 𝐻𝐢𝐬𝐿P token, than like core remittances. So it was over like 30 billion run rate at one point that was just coming into the country. And so that just shows that like there's a lot of potential. Like if you put up the right structures and you harness this technology, even within a kind of local regulatory framework, you can actually pull ahead and you can sort of increase the economic freedom, within your country and for your people. Like for India, for example, there's a lot of top quality infrastructure projects like Polygon and others, but so far they haven't been able to spark up or like allow for retail access. And that's something that we hope that they'll sort of change in the future because it's something to their benefit. Yeah. So there's a lot that's happening, I think, even within APAC. But you have to try to at least get the regulatory policy right, looking at everything in mind in order to advance kind of your own policy goals as well.
Well, you brought up 𝐻𝐢𝐬𝐿P again. At its peak, 𝐻𝐢𝐬𝐿P Infinity, the average user in the Philippines who played the game was making $1,000 US a month, which is a paradigm shift. That's 5 to 10x what the average monthly salary is. And so that's not only transformational for our industry, that puts real, world assets in their pocket. That puts food on their table. And so I couldn't agree more that these borderless transactions that can support these, I don't want to say third world, but developing markets can be a huge catalyst for good.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, if you take 𝐻𝐢𝐬𝐿P, right? I mean, there's still fundamental flaws in their structure, right? Like there was a lot of people that may have been making $1,000 a month, but they went and bought a ton of assets and obviously got burned very hard from this, right? And so I think there's a lot of challenges, but I think going to the regulatory side, I think it's a bit more complex, right? Because it's, for example, like FTX was regulated, right? And this was part of it. And they have a lot of related parties that should have been in scope, most likely, and probably should have been part of this picture that was under regulatory scrutiny. And so, like, I don't think that regulation is actually the answer for everything, right? If you think about what this industry can bring, it's real-time transparency. Like, there's no regulator that's doing real-time transparency into things that this industry can bring to change the dynamic of how things work. So like, think about like proof of reserves, even for centralized exchanges as an example. That's being talked about a lot right now, obviously, given the context of FTX. But I think it solves potentially a big problem in a more dynamic way, right? But I think there's interesting ways that you can solve this problem, not only relying on the regulator. And I think there's a big problem when you only rely on the regulator, because what's going to happen is we're going to cut a lot of people out of the system, right? I mean, we already have 1.1 billion people that don't have an identity. I mean, we can't cut them out of the system forever. I mean, they actually have an opportunity to be part of this system when you have a decentralized world and you have an ability to use decentralized technologies. And if every on-ramp and every opportunity cuts them out because they can't pass KYC or AML because they don't have identities, like we have a problem, right? So we got to think about how do we make this work for institutions? How do we still protect consumers, but how do we still make this system work for all of the rest of the world and not cut big chunks of the population out?
Well, I think self-policing could be a massive component to it, but we don't have that leadership right now. We don't have that clarion voice who's saying, this is what we're going to do, this is our standard, and we will do real-time transparency or reporting. And in a situation like this, especially given what's just recently happened, sunlight is the absolute best deodorant of all, but I don't see anyone stepping up. I mean, I would just pose it, we'll get to you, Jamie, in 1 second, pose it back to you. What would you have done differently? What should have been done differently up to this point? Maybe using FTX or any one of the last several major high-profile failures. What could have been done differently, and how could they have been more transparent?
Yeah, I mean, I think to Ali's point, like regulation, I think is sort of a minimum standard that like only sort of gets you so far. We saw like 2008, there's all sorts of stuff that happens even in like a highly regulated financial services sector as well. So I don't think that that's going to be necessarily the kind of end all be all, but I think that the two challenges that are happening for this industry is one is just general regulatory coordination because of the nature of the industry, like it's very global, it's very spread out. Regulators are also having a hard time just staying like, within lockstep of each other. So I think there's some kind of super agencies and bodies like IOSCO and FSB and FATF that are trying to kind of harmonize and bring things sort of in line. So that I think that's helpful. I think even on like the industry stuff, there are consortiums that have somewhat been a little bifurcated, kind of east and west. So I do think that this might be a catalyst event that might change and open up the conversation again.
Yeah, I want to add some points that at least let's say that we're back to several months ago. I think one thing regulator definitely can do is regulator can force every exchange use third-party custody, at least, right? So still we need custody. We need a very good company can provide custody service, right? But there must be someone stand out and say, hey, every exchange, you should not keep clients' coins yourself. You should use third-party custody. It should not the clients themselves because they are retail, they are small, they don't have the power to ask exchange do such kind of thing. It should be the regulator, right?
I mean, I think a lot of these things, like we don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? Like, even though a lot of this industry is built on decentralization, I mean, players like Coinbase still practice transparency. I mean, it's literally a public. There's a third-party auditor. You know who they are. That you can trust that like they've done a lot of the work to provide some assurances to the market, right? And like we're not doing that at a lot of the other players, right? These are not new things we need to reinvent the wheel on. Having like a legitimate auditor go in and actually tell us, hey, like they have these assets and they have these liabilities, right? And they've gone through it. Now, of course, you still have the fraud risk because I mean, auditors can't catch everything, but like that already solves 95+% of the problem, right? Like you would have caught basically all of these issues that are happening right now with 3AC and the risk with Voyager, and like you would have seen like this concentrated risk, and these risks would have been brought up.
So what I hear you saying is don't allow the entity to write their own accounting software?
It's a good starting point.
This is where you do the mind-blown emoji.
Jamie?
Well, I mean, I spend most of my days in and out sort of telling art teams to design Medusas and what sword a centaur should hold and, all sorts. So I'm not going to pretend I know much about sort of the finance, the regulations of it all. I mean, we moved into blockchain by chance, actually, as it were, and sort of PYR did as well as it did, I guess, because we already had many established games and projects which are far sort of further developed than other blockchain games at the time, and we rode the Axie wave up. I would say on the regulatory front, the only ones I do know are sort of gaming related, and it's tough when you add any sort of financial incentive or an economy in a game, because you're immediately sort of playing with things that sort of institutions and banks want a part of. So you've got to play by the rules. The three that I can think of that really sort of we have to sort of navigate a way around are, first of all, the NFTs. I mean, I was very excited when Apple said they were going to allow NFTs in the game, in their mobile apps, because obviously mobile gaming is an enormous market. And then that happiness sort of did a U-turn when I realized that they said, well, you can use NFTs in the Apple games, but you have to purchase it through the mobile app. Now, it's not so much I care about the sort of the 30% tax, whatever they want to put on it. It's just completely, it's what's the word? It's just impossible to sort of implement that kind of technology where people can transfer NFTs outside of the app, and they can sort of buy them outside the app. And of course, where do you define what's bought inside the mobile app and what isn't, and what blockchain would you use in Apple? So I don't think they thought that out properly, but maybe it's a step in the right direction. The other two, I'd say, regulatory-wise, on a gaming front, of course, gambling, which we don't do anyway, is not allowed. And the strange one, which you might not know about, is something called loot boxes, where, in fact, World of Warcraft and these bigger games aren't even allowed to do them now. I mean, when you click on an item and you don't know what it is, if it's a sword and it's centralized, and who cares, because it's a sword. However, if you're giving that value, like an NFT value, and all the blockchain games sort of based on NFTs that have value, let's say you find a treasure chest in the underworld of Hades and open it up and it's, I don't know, the sword of Achilles. Now, if that has a monetary value, but anything over a cent, it's illegal in a lot of countries, because it's loot boxes are a type of gambling where if you don't know what's in it and you're playing to sort of get that sort of valuable item, and it is valuable, then you've broken a law in a large amount of or Western countries anyway. So it's navigating. But the minute you add sort of an economy and a finance to any sort of infrastructure and gaming, you're entering a world which, from a game studio's point of view, is new, and it's a little bit heavy. But on the flip side, as you brought up the 𝐻𝐸 model, I mean, it can be incredibly beneficial. I mean, the whole play-to-earn model was utterly unsustainable how 𝐻𝐸 presented it, but I think it opened the doors for the metaverse sort of theme and trend on blockchain gaming, but also I think if you're going to go down the play-to-earn model, and I think you've got to say from the outset, set your KPI, say, listen, we're doing this, either are we doing it to make money or are we doing it to help? Now, there can be a balance there. You can say, okay, listen, I mean, play-to-earn does have a way of helping developing countries because it is borderless transactions, and it is, a fun, I use that word loosely because actually it wasn't exactly, Call of Duty or whatever, but it was a visualized way of making money, and it is borderless. So if you're going to do it, go into it with fresh eyes and say, let's make it sustainable. That secondary token, let's give it utility. Let's give it you have to reach a certain experience before you can pull those tokens out. Let's stop, all this farming and make it sustainable where that token retains its value. So there are ways to do it, and I think I flip back and forward on play to earn because I think it's a mindset which is just it's not gaming and it's not sustainable. But if you can make it sustainable, say, listen, this is to allow those in developed countries to make money in a fun way, then yeah, it can be done. But yeah, in terms of the FTX and all the crypto monetary stuff, I'm not going to pretend I know much about it, other than there's some crazy stuff going on right now, and everyone's getting affected. But our gamers are still gaming, so that's all that matters, I suppose, for us.
Well, I personally, and this is from someone who throws one of the largest conferences in the NFT space, think NFTs is an awful moniker for what the underlying technology really supports. And I think much the same of play-to-earn gaming. I think that's a little too narrow-casted. I think play-to-experience, play-to-access, that gets a lot more interesting as a conversation at that point, because then it's a more, to your point earlier, rich immersive experience. You're not just myopic in your worldview. I'm not going to, because earning $5 a day is not going to be a meaningful amount of money for much of the developed world. And so how do you get mass adoption of a global gaming title? Going back to APAC, I'm really interested because it's been an explosive region for Web3 and crypto companies. White Star Capital came out with a report. There are over 600 currently in the region. How do we continue to develop that ecosystem, and how do we see that number go over the next, say, 3 to 5 years from 600 to 6,000?
I think it's a good question. I mean, I think the challenge is going to be we want very legitimate products launching that are going to be engaging games or products that are going to have good controls that are, going to be sustainable long term, right? And I don't know if there's actually, maybe not, but I don't know if 6,000 sounds like you're going to have a lot of failures along the way. Yeah. And that means a lot of people get hurt, right, along the way. And so we do need to be conscious of this. But I think a really big part of, building this ecosystem up is, you've got now people across the Philippines, across a lot of Southeast Asia. I mean, you're seeing it even in like place like Saudi Arabia having really interesting numbers around gamers. You're seeing that interest and that adoption come from them. And you're seeing some people with life-changing experiences in a positive way, obviously some very negative experiences as well with, the crash of some of these economies. But I think there's that glimpse or that idea of where the potential is, right? And I think we're still only really tip of the iceberg of that potential and really unlocking this to, really transcend or trump what we see with like free-to-play gaming, right? And this can really be, I think, the next big evolution or revolution of gaming, but I think we're still a long way away. So I think, one, you've got, I think, a lot of gamer interest. Some have been burned. I mean, in this industry, consumers have had the short end of the stick, right? Like, I mean, with all the stuff that's going on over the last 6 months, a lot of consumers hurt, right? I mean, it's going to take them time to warm back up. And that's not just the financial products, it's the gaming products. That's basically every product, like even wallets, et cetera. It's all across the board right now. So I think it's going to take time for consumers to warm back up. But I do think that there's the potential here. And then I think you need to pair that with, of course, incredible tech talent. So you have this like tectonic shift that's happening because you've got this incredible tech talent, never seen, in this way before, leaving the biggest corporates. Obviously, there's a lot of restructuring happening right now, but that's opening a whole new world of incredible entrepreneurs, and which many of them are going to become, to help fuel that, whether that's across fintech, gaming, or Web3 and intersections of those, et cetera. So I think this is actually, the culmination of what you need to actually start creating just incredible innovations and technologies that really put all the right pieces together of that puzzle for the next sort of generation to come.
John, you were going to jump in there.
Yeah, sure. So I think the number of companies is not the most important things. I think currently is a quite interesting timing that you will find let's say that the crypto companies, they can survive right now, which means that they really have the business. We know that a lot of companies, they are seems quite good, or a lot of projects, they seems quite active in bullish market. It's not because they have real business or they have real users. Mainly, they highly rely on something called the token economy. But right now, I think if crypto companies, they still have users, they still can survive, they still can earn money, which means that they really have the business. The things they are doing is a real thing. It's a real application. So, and for investor, it's the same. I think in bullish market, it's very hard to distinguish between all the projects. Which one is good, which one is not good. But right now, every crypto company that can survive in this cycle, they are good crypto company. Yeah. So it's how I think this is how things happen and evolve. Finally, we will find that all the applications, all the innovations, they really happen in bearish market, not bullish. Yeah.
Well, the unfortunate truth is all growth comes from pain. So we may be in a little point of pain right now, but I don't think it will be that long-lived. No, Jamie?
You're right. I mean, it does, and I think you're going to. I think like it's either going to be enormous or it's not. I mean, it's simple as that. I mean, if you look at Asia specifically, I mean, the gaming market, I mean, it's absolutely enormous. And I always say in some of these talks, I say, like, the definition of success is when a child walks into a playground and says, do you have, or this is the cool thing to have. And the moment a kid comes into school and says, well, but has your game got an NFT in, or has your game got VR or anything sort of blockchain related, then you're literally on the cusp of an absolute epidemic of proportions of spreading through every single country. So I think we don't know. I think we're toying around with it a little bit. I think Axie was the first sort of press into it, and I know Ubisoft and some other gaming companies are sort of, fraying at the edges and sort of saying, well, is this going to work? I know that Ubisoft had a terrible reaction to sort of putting NFTs in their game, and I know World of Warcraft and Blizzard don't even need NFTs. They've got billions of dollars turnover of people paying. I still pay for sort of mobile games, like $1 here, $500 in a month. You think, oh my God, on Angry Birds, people are still paying. But the minute that trend shifts and people do expect free to play and sort of NFTs and blockchain technology and economies within it, and that seems to be the norm, then it's going to go from 0 to 100 in an absolute tiny time. And I like to think that some of us will be at the forefront of it. But we don't know. We don't know, yeah.
I think it was Rumsfeld. There are known knowns and known unknowns. We might be in unknowns.
Yeah.
I just also quickly want to add that I think at the end of the day, it's also a little bit of going back to the roots of solving user problems. I think a lot of times, like especially during the bull run, like there's just so many copycats and there's just a bit of a gold rush mentality that sets in. I think this is actually a great time to just be able to kind of take a step back, build quietly, think about like what exactly are you trying to solve for. So even if you take examples like stablecoins, like that's really kind of like one of the financial use cases that is at scale now. And so we're starting to see the scale up of market structure and just the infrastructure layer that can support the next kind of layer up. And that's like sort of a great vertical to kind of, peg like a lot of startups again. So today it's really kind of US denominated stablecoins. There's really no like first principles reason why there shouldn't be stablecoins across for everything, right? There's this kind of big FX market, there's kind of cross-border remittances. So you should have like these FX kind of, native crypto pools, the liquidity pools like everywhere. And so we are seeing like examples of these, like in Southeast Asia in particular, that are starting to come up. But those are the kinds of examples I think that were are really good for like bear markets for people to really focus on, so that you can like build the things that people want that will actually solve problems as well.
I completely agree. I think this opportunity for thoughtful, quiet building in this space that gives us better foundational elements and quite frankly removes the friction. I think crypto, you talk to a plurality of people, or at least conversations I have, and you explain what's needed with a MetaMask wallet, and I mean, you can see their eyes start to glaze over. And so for me, I see projects like what Starbucks is doing with their loyalty program. They've got 25 million installed users in the US, and I believe just north of 100 million worldwide. They're going to an NFT-driven platform, but they're never mentioning the word crypto. So from a front-facing standpoint, it's just a better mousetrap. But and we're winding down very, very quickly, so I'll look for brief answers. What's the biggest blind spot? How do we remove that friction across any aspect of crypto?
Yeah, I think on the sort of supply side, as Ali was sort of referencing, I think we need a lot more talent still coming in, and I think we're starting to see the big Web 2 to Web 3 migration that kicked off on this cycle. So even though kind of crypto building activity is at an all-time high, it's off a very small base, and so compared to kind of traditional software development, we've got a long way to go. But I'm very optimistic that this is going to happen. But the right kind of policies and sort of incentives and market forces to help bring this along and accelerate is going to go a long way in closing the talent gap.
I agree. John?
Yeah, I can give time to ask.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a big part. It's players like Starbucks getting involved. I mean, for example, with Altered State Machine, which Coinbase is also an investor in. I mean, we're partnered with, for example, with FIFA. Like, it's perfect timing, obviously, given the World Cup coming up. With Splinterlands, I think it's a really cool aspect of, being able to see and create new ways of actually interacting with NFTs. I mean, we're doing something like 3.5 million rentals a day successfully of NFTs. I mean, this is like monster numbers that you're still seeing even in this market, right? So I think these types of things are starting to change the dynamic and really change the industry, I think, moving forward. And I think having great, fundamentally strong players like that being able to bring this type of adoption is going to also continue to help players like Starbucks and other major players continue to come into the industry.
I think Splinterland's a great example. Jesse and his team are doing a phenomenal job there. Jamie?
Yeah, I think one of the missing links we're having with blockchain technology and adoption is it's a very sort of adult-oriented business. We're sort of going from sort of adult and mature technology sort of driven companies to try and work out how to help help the sort of same peers, where to gauge the success of something, to gauge the adoption of something, we need to look at the younger generation a lot more, look what children are using, look what works for them. Because these, you know, I remember when Google was introduced when we were at school, it was after that they became wider, and sort of Facebook was introduced at university. So that's why Minecraft and Fortnite, these are the massive, massive sort of applications used by the youth. And if you see them adopting blockchain technology, or you sort of tailor your products towards them and they adopt it, then that will be the future. So I think the missing link would actually be looking at a younger demographic, which we're trying to do with Metascapes.
And John, please briefly take us home.
Yeah, I think the blockchain adoption is, I think there's a huge potential in gaming, in DAO, DAO, in DeFi, and I believe in 5 to 10 years, not only native tokens like Bitcoin, Ethereum, the things we call crypto, not only such kind of asset on-chain. I believe that finally all the data and all the assets will have an on-chain version. And at that day, this technology will be highly related to everyone, related to our daily life. We are still at the very beginning, and a lot of infrastructure, a lot of work we need to solve and have to fight for. Yeah.
Well, everyone, help me thank this distinguished panel for having just an amazing conversation. And I think the takeaway is the future is still quite bright.